Welcome back to another episode here on the Husband Coach's Corner. Today, we're going to be talking about routines. And these are really important because they do help us drive to get to that vision statement that we've written, or if you haven't written, that hopefully you will at some point. It helps us achieve the vision of our marriage. Now, many of us already have routines, and throughout the course of this episode, I'm going to show you how you can identify what your routine is, and then areas where maybe you can plug in some time to develop your relationship with your wife. This is going to be a fantastic episode. So with all of these topics, I'm ready to dive in. But before we do, I do want to let you know, if you are looking for coaching or any sort of assistance with your marriage and just helping you develop a more intimate relationship with your wife, check the description box below, sign up for a free consult, and I will help you design a vision, a game plan, and some goals that you can start working towards today to build your marriage. The importance of developing a routine, I think that's super critical, right? We need to understand the importance of developing a routine. Now, routines are something that we already have in our lives, right? We wake up, we maybe make coffee, and then we go to work, or eat breakfast, go to work. I think you get the idea, right? In our marriage, we actually have the exact same things. Our wives, they do certain things, and then we, as the husbands, also go and do certain things. Like, my routine is I wake up, I come into my office, I read my word, I write some content for these episodes, and then I go out and I do my day, right? Whatever is on the calendar for that day. This is like my normal routine. Well, what my wife and I noticed is when we didn't have a dedicated time for us to spend with one another each day, our relationship, our intimacy, we didn't really want to talk with one another. So I think it's important that you take some time to really develop a routine, because by not having it, you're going to eventually start to move away from your spouse. And I don't want that for anyone. Now, used properly, a routine can drive enjoyment, long-lasting commitment, and even deep contentment with the marriage. And I'm not talking about the cheap contentment. I'm talking about real, rich, empowering, loving contentment where you are just energized to be with your wife. And that's what a routine really can do. So that's the importance of a routine. Now, let's talk about some of the pitfalls, because I think that there are some pitfalls that many people or many couples fall into. And the first pitfall that I would share with you is couples think a routine will make their marriage dull and boring. That's just not true. All of the couples that I have coached, or the husbands that I've coached, and the couples that I've surveyed or interviewed, they have all reported that when they make a routine and they know what it is that they're going to do, especially when they have that dedicated time on the calendar that I talk about very often here on the show, they find that their relationship, they have more value added to the relationship, and they look forward to those times. Now, that comes down to being able to communicate effectively with your wife. Once you have learned to communicate and spend that time with your wife, that can be the most enjoyable time. And as much as I would love to say, like, I am the master at this, I am not. Last Saturday, my wife and I went on a date, and we were going to go play disc golf. If you're familiar with that sport or game, whatever you want to call it. Well, I was teaching her how to play, and I was really excited to go play disc golf. But on the way to the disc golf course, I was asking her some pretty deep questions about our relationship. And she wanted to spend more time talking about those questions than actually getting out onto the disc golf course. So fast forward, we get to the parking lot where the disc golf course is, and I'm ready to hop out the car and go play. And she still wants to continue talking about our relationship because it means that much to her. Now, again, I come to you as a humble man, a husband that is still finding ways to love his wife every single day. And I am also trying to become a better man in the process. But I completely missed what my wife wanted to actually do to spend the time. And I was so excited more about going to play disc golf than actually hearing what my wife had to say. So when you are spending time, make sure that you're present in the moment and you are both on the exact same, wavelength when it comes to what it is that you want to talk about. Because you were anything like me, maybe you just jump out and you go on. So just keep that in mind. But that was our scheduled date. It was scheduled in our routine. It was a scheduled date, like I always talk about. So it wasn't something that was, like, oh man, we got to go do this date thing. It was like, hey, let's go. And we're going to go play disc golf. My wife was interested in learning how to do that because I recently learned how, and I wanted to share how to play the game. So just keep that in mind. That is a pitfall. Couples think a routine will make their marriage dull and boring, and that is not the case. The second pitfall that I often hear when asking about routines is couples don't realize they have a routine already. So when I sit down and, later on when we talk about how to develop a drill, you'll see that you actually already have a routine. Everything you do, you usually do often, right? As humans, we're creatures of habit. If we have a tendency to drive a certain way to work, guess what? That's the way you're always going to drive to work. I actually walk to work, and there's really only one way to get to my job from my house. However, in order for me to, kind of switch things up, I choose a different side of the street to walk on. And that sounds weird, right? But what that's helping me with is when my wife presents something where we're going to change the routine, right? And just bear with me, this is going to make sense. When my wife says, hey, I want to change the routine, I don't meet her with adversity because I'm already training myself that, changing the routine isn't a problem as long as it gets us to our end state, which is what our marriage vision actually is. And that's what our routines really need to be centered around, what your marriage vision is together. If you're doing something in your routine that is not geared towards the vision of your marriage, then it's probably, and I'll rephrase that a little bit. If you're doing something that is altering the vision of your marriage in a negative way, then you should not be doing that routine, right? You should actually develop a routine that builds the intimacy, the long connection, and ultimately the lasting relationship that you have in your vision. That's what I'm getting at. So like I was saying, couples don't even realize that they have a routine already. And that's okay, because once you realize that you do have a routine, you can start to move stuff around and make it make sense for your marriage and for the season or the chapter of life that you're in. The third thing that is a pitfall for many couples is couples don't want to take time to plan out a routine because one or both of them won't keep it. Now, this is a common issue that I've run into with many couples where it's like, yeah, we want to do a routine. We want to make plans for going on dates, but something always trumps it, or I don't put in the effort, so I don't even want to do it, and it's a waste of time to plan. There's all kinds of conversations that I've heard centered around not wanting to do a routine because the other either the wife doesn't want to value the routine or the husband doesn't want to. And here's what I would suggest to anyone who falls into this pitfall: do it. All right. And that doesn't, I hope that I don't drop like earth shattering news when I share my content, right? I think the more simple the plan is, the easier it is to actually follow through on. And that's why I'm just saying, just go and do it. Develop the routine. You will gain more from having a plan and a routine of what you guys are going to do in your life than not having one. So don't fall into the pitfall of, I don't want to plan one because my wife isn't going to follow through with it. Or if you're a wife listening to this, I don't want to plan a routine because my husband isn't going to follow through with it. Go ahead and do the work, plan the routine as a couple, by the way. And we're going to talk about that here in a second when we develop a routine. But develop a routine as a couple, and then we'll work on sticking to the routine, sticking to the plan. Because let's face it, life happens. Sometimes you can't stick to the plan. So now that we know the importance and the pitfalls of a routine, let's talk about developing one, especially if you've never done this before. I think it's going to be it's a very simple exercise or drill, if you will. And I think that you definitely want to have your spouse with you. You want to have your wife with you, like you do this as a couple. Do not try to plan a routine without your wife. All right. And if you're a wife listening to this, do not try to plan a routine without your husband. They usually end up one-sided, and it's, in my experience and what I've seen, it never ends well. So just don't do that. So how do you develop a routine? The first step, you got to get a calendar. All right. And if you don't have a calendar, you can get a sheet of paper. But I think having months, days, and, all that information available to you on a calendar that you can write on. Now, you can use one of two things. You can use a hard paper calendar, which my wife loves. I personally enjoy using a Google Calendar. That is my personal preference. But no matter which one you choose to use, just make sure that you grab a calendar. All right. That's my strong recommendation. And what you're going to do is go through the entire year, mark off all of the important dates. So anniversaries, birthdays, vacations, whatever is an important date. Okay. You want to mark those off for an entire year out. And the good news is anniversaries and birthdays, those happen on the same day every year. So when we start to develop our routines, when you get into that month, like, okay, we have a birthday in this month. How do we want to plan around that? Right? This is the reason why we're marking off these important dates. And you may have some additional important dates that you need to put on your calendar. That is whatever you and your wife decide is important, put it on the calendar. All right. The next thing is mark things that you have to do no matter what every single week on your calendar. Okay. So that could be grocery shopping. For my wife and I, it's church. We go to church every Sunday as a family, and it's a part of our vision statement in our marriage. Right. So it's something that we value extremely high. So it's always like the number one priority on our calendar. Now, there's grocery shopping. You got to plan time to go get food, right? My wife doesn't care for grocery shopping. I don't mind grocery shopping. So sometimes we trade on who does the grocery shopping. That's, very minute, but that could be a part of the routine. Who does the grocery shopping and when does it happen? The next thing is visiting an elderly parent. Maybe you have a mother or father that needs a little bit of extra care, and once a week or every other week or whatever it may be, you have to go visit and take care of him or her. Put it on the calendar, because if you don't, and you don't plan when you're going to do it, even if both of you already know, hey, every Tuesday I go over to my mom or dad's house to do this, and it's from this time to this time, then put it on the calendar so you can see it, right? Because what a lot of people run into when we start planning stuff is it happens in our mind, but we never put it on paper, so it's not shared information for everyone to see. Putting it on a calendar makes it a little bit more of an illustration, so you can start to see everything overlaying on top of each other and where your time is being competed against, right? That's the reason why we're using a calendar. Let's continue developing a plan. So maybe you also need to put in going to the gym. If you are big into fitness and, taking care of yourself, and which I do recommend, you should go to the gym. Working out is great. Put that on the calendar of when you're going to do your workouts, even if it's before your wife gets out of the bed. Like I work out in the morning, usually 5:30 to 6:30. That's my window of fitness. And my wife is still in the bed most days, but I'm up and I'm out, right? Put it on the calendar. Now, once you have all of those things on the calendar, what you want to do is mark activities that your kids have to do weekly or monthly. All right. You want to mark down the things that your kids have to do. So that could be sports, that could be social clubs, etc. Just put those events somewhere on the calendar, wherever they lie. So that way you can see where you have to either one, be the chaperone, because that's just the way it is, right? We have to take our kids to these places if you have kids that can't drive. And sometimes you even have to stay at these places. So now you're starting to identify where maybe two people, like both of you, can go. Like if your kid has a dance practice, right? And you have to go, you got to sit there because maybe it's too far away from the house to drive there and drive back every time. So you just sit there and maybe bring a book and, you're sitting there by yourself. Well, if your wife can go with you, then why don't you just take your wife with you and then take that time while your kid is at practice to do something with your wife? And if you're a wife listening to this, maybe suggest that to your husband. But maybe that won't work because your husband or your wife has some other obligation during the time, which is why you're the one taking your child to this event. These are things that, you're starting to see on the calendar, and you can make a decision, an informed decision. That's all that we're trying to get to. So now that we have a lot of these events, we're going to move on to the next thing that we want to do with this calendar, right? We have everything overlaid, and you can see where you are in time and space, and you're talking about this. Well, now your responsibility is to mark off on the calendar 30 minutes per day. All right. If you've heard any of my content, it's always 30 minutes per day that I'm recommending. And that is wherever you put that. Whatever works for you and your wife, that's what you should do. 30 minutes per day. Then 1 to 2 hours per week, you should have a event or a date for your wife. Men, you got to date your wives. All right. Don't be the guy who doesn't date his wife. And that's not a threat or anything of that sort. That's me telling you as a man who learned the importance of dating his wife, how it builds on our marriage vision. Because again, I'm not throwing anything in my routine that doesn't build towards that vision. But at the same time, I'm also getting to know my wife more. And I learn things about my wife every day because when you start dating your wife, natural conversations happen where maybe you would have never asked a question, especially when you start doing things that are outside of your comfort zone. And then your wife says something like, "Oh yeah, I remember." And then you're like, "Whoa, I never knew that." You see what I'm saying? That's all I'm getting at, guys. And then the next thing that you need to do is, as far as planning for time to spend with your wife, is plan once a month some segment of time that's 5 hours or more. Now, that 5-hour window, maybe you can't do a day where you're able to do 5 hours, right? So instead, maybe just add on more 1 to 2 hours in the week that accumulate to that 5 hours, or make it 1 to 3 hours. This is really subjective and interchangeable based off of your relationship. So do what makes sense for you and take that for what it's worth. So what do you do during the time together? This is something that a lot of people are like, I have no idea what I should be doing when I'm spending time with my wife or whatever that case is. So I'll just offer up a few ideas here. You can do a Google search, and I've shared some ideas in the past, but one of them is you can read a book together. If you guys are into reading, why not read a book together? Spend some time praying together. That's super important, especially if you're a believer in Christ. I think that it's important to spend some time praying with your wife. Eat a meal together and have a very casual conversation. I don't recommend having deep intellectual or emotional conversations about your marriage while sharing a meal, because a meal is supposed to be something that brings you closer together. So you should have more heartfelt or like warm conversations, funny conversations, enjoyable conversations, things of that sort. Another thing you can do is play a game, either a video game, a board game, a card game, doesn't matter. Play a game. All right. You can go for a walk. I've mentioned this many times. Going for a walk, doing physical activity with your wife is always something going to be value added. You can also work on a house project. If you have a home that requires a little bit of TLC and it's a project that your wife and you are able to do together, you should just do that project with her. Paint a house, or not a house, paint a wall, put in some new tile or whatever it may be. Do that project together, put it on the calendar, map it out, plan it, and execute it. So those are just a handful of things that you can do with the time. Be creative, but whatever you choose to do, it just needs to be something that you do together. And the reason is, if you have kids and your entire relationship is centered around taking care of the kids and doing things for the kids and doing things with the kids, eventually your children are going to move away. And mothers have a natural bond to their children where they want to spend more time with their kids. So if you're allowing your wife to spend a ton of time with her kids, you will be neglected. And when they move out, you're going to be faced with, well, now what do we do? So you definitely want to start building that right now, because you don't want down the line, when your kids move out of the house, for your wife to be like, oh, well, I have no idea who you are because I feel like I just lost my best friends. And that happens more often than you can even imagine. So if there's anything you can take away from this episode today, guys, date your wife, make time for your wife, and spend time. So that way, when your kids are out of the house, you guys are not at each other's throats, and your wife isn't feeling confused like, hey, why should I even care to spend time with you? She's just going to spend the time with you because it's natural, and you guys have built that relationship. Again, that long-lasting contentment, connection, and intimacy, enjoyment. That's the whole purpose of building a routine and sticking to it. So the last thing that I would offer when you're building your routine or developing it is schedule a review day once per week. You should schedule it because you're going to need it. Life is going to happen, and maybe the date night that you had planned isn't going to actually come up, and you know well enough in advance, so then maybe you can just replan that day. All right. Or maybe you want to add some more stuff into the week because you have an opportunity, like something else fell through, and it's like, hey, we can do, and then fill in the blank. Plan more time to spend with your wife, and really plan a review day once per week. My wife and I review usually Sunday or Monday. We look at our calendar and we say, okay, here's all the stuff that's happening this week. And we go about 2 to 3 weeks out if we know that information. And we'll go even further if we have some information, especially when it comes to kids' activities, where it's like, hey, the kids are going to camp this week. So what do we want to do? Do we want to go out for dinner? What are, stuff like that. So definitely plan a review day once per week. And if you miss it a few times, that's okay. But you definitely will find the value in planning that review day. So the next thing that I have is how to include your entire family in the routine. And this really just boils down to putting on the calendar events that are family-driven events. Like for our family going to church, that is a family-driven event, or a family all-inclusive event, right? The other thing that we have that we recently started and, our family seems to be enjoying is weekly game nights. Now, this is something that all four of us, because I have two kids, all four of us come together and we decide, hey, are we going to play a video game, which is Mario Party, or maybe it's Uno? It doesn't matter, right? And sometimes I pick the game, sometimes the kids pick the game, sometimes my wife picks the game, and we play multiple games. And the goal here, even though I'm a competitive person in games, my kids seem to always beat me in Uno because they play by different rules, but that's another conversation. The point there is I'm spending time with my kids. We're having a family interaction. And again, this is tied to the vision of our marriage that my wife and I had, which is building a strong family bond. And it's impossible for us to build a strong family bond if we don't take the time to build that bond together by doing things. I have a dream. We haven't done it yet, but I hope to do it in the near future, is to take my family out on a picnic. But that is another way of us just building that bond. We go out, we hang out at a park for a couple hours, eat some food, play some music or whatever, and just enjoy each other's company, playing games out at a park. These things don't have to be, I'm not saying what I'm doing is the best thing that you could do. I'm just offering it up as a suggestion, but you should definitely plan time to spend with your kids and your wife together, or your family time together. Because if you don't have family time to build those bonds, especially if it's a part of your vision, you're going to look back on your marriage and say, man, we really failed at that. And my goal is to help everyone achieve their marital vision as they draft those things out. The other reason why I believe it's important to spend time as a family and map that time out is because you're developing memories. And down the line, as your kids grow older, you guys are going to remember those times where it's like, oh man, you remember that time when dad, we used to just beat him all the time in Uno and he would get so mad and it was just fun and, things like that. But what it also does is it sets a good example of what your kids should be looking to model in their marriages. Think about the generational blessing that you are putting into your family by spending time together, playing games, enjoying each other's company, that your kids will then model, so that way they will have the exact same generational blessing, and it just continues to go down the generations. So hopefully by now you understand the importance of a routine, the pitfalls that many couples fall into, how to develop a routine, and how to incorporate your family into the routine that you develop. A routine is useless if you're not going to stick to it. I'm also not oblivious to the fact that life happens and you can't always stick to the routine. So my recommendation, stick to it at least 80% of the time. You're going to find yourself doing really, really well. What you will notice once you start developing your routine and executing that routine is that it comes naturally, and that you really appreciate all of what it is that you're doing in your routine, and you don't want to step away from it. It becomes harder to step away from it. Now, if you already have a routine, then my encouragement to you is to take a look at it and identify the gaps, because all routines have areas that can be improved upon. My wife and I, we have a great routine, but I know that we have some areas that can be improved upon. So hopefully you can examine your routine, refine it, and execute a new version to bring more value, love, and intimacy to your relationship. So, like always, if you want to get in contact with me, check the description box below. And if you really want to help sharing this content with friends, family members, someone who you think would really benefit, that goes a long way, especially when it comes to the algorithm of sharing this content on social platforms and even on podcasting platforms. You can also leave a rating over on Apple Podcasts and a review if that's something that you're interested in. And then you can shoot me an email down below as well. I would love to hear from you. So until next time, I want you guys to find a way to love your wife every day.